Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you. This is the house of God.
I had no affiliation to that organization. I didn't even know they were going to this church until we followed them there. We were there chronicling protests. That's it. It's called journalism. First Amendment, all that stuff.
Don Lemon, podcaster, following the protesters into an anti-ICE protest inside a church in Minneapolis. The governor's office put out a statement saying the governor has repeatedly and unequivocally urged protesters to do so peacefully. While people have a right to speak out, he in no way supports interrupting a place of worship. Well, that is consistent with the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harmeet Dillon, who said a house of worship is not a public forum for your protest. It's a space protected from exactly such acts by federal criminal and civil laws, nor does the First Amendment protect your pseudo-journalism of disrupting a prayer service. You are on notice. That was in response to Don Lemon. Let's bring in our panel. Fox News chief political analyst Brit Hume joins us. Fox News contributor Mark Thiessen, Fox News media analyst Howard Kurtz, and Yemisi Egbewale, former chief of staff advisor to the Biden White House press office. Britt, let me get your thoughts first. Big picture, what do you think?
Well, I think that the shooting of that woman up in Minnesota by an ICE agent last week turned public opinion, fairly or unfairly, against ICE. I think this event yesterday in that church may have had the opposite effect. The administration should have an airtight case that its agents have a right to be in Minnesota and in Minneapolis, rooting out illegal immigrants, particularly those who either have committed or are wanted for crimes other than illegal immigration. But the public opinion has not been strongly in its favor at all so far. This could change that because it's so obviously inappropriate for what happened to have happened. And the governor may say what he wants belatedly today about how he doesn't support that. Well, if that's the case, then where were the Minnesota authorities at the time it was happening? Nowhere to be seen, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I don't want to give tons of oxygen to folks who just want to get clicks, but what do you make of the Don Lemon thing and the First Amendment and following the organization in there and then doing these interviews, Howie?
Well, obviously, what Senator Warner failed to appreciate, he said there could be a trade war. Well, Trump loves trade wars, so I don't think that carries much weight. I do think the biggest problem here, and look, ICE agents have a tough job. They're under siege. They have to make life and death decisions. But at the same time, when they're smashing a car window and pulling an American citizen out and sending her to the ground, I think that's a problem. The biggest problem, in my view, is the criminal investigation of Governor Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Frey. And so with that looked at, it does seem to a lot of people like it's a partisan approach. They're not out there whipping up protests. They're saying what they think, which is, in their view, this is out of control in their state and city.
Right. So, Yemisi, for all that's been said, James Carville and others says that all these images and everything coming out of Minneapolis is going to lead to a wipeout in the midterms. If you look at the latest Wall Street Journal poll, who's best to handle? Immigration, Republicans in Congress, 44, Democrats, 33. Economy, 38-32. Tariffs, 36-34. I mean, it's one poll, but it shows you that maybe it's not moving as much as people think it is.
No, and situations like this with Don Lemon in the church are not helpful. Look, I don't believe that faith and politics are mutually exclusive. The people who led the civil rights movement were church leaders. But this is not the civil rights movement. And this is harkening back to 2020, where we saw people from outside of a community engage in civil unrest and leave. Don Lemon doesn't live in Minnesota. He is not going to help that community heal and get put back together, and people are watching.
All right, I want to turn to this Greenland issue. This is the Dutch finance minister kind of responding on tariffs, the threat.
We see this as unnecessary and irresponsible. It's unnecessary because we are part of the same alliance. We make the same threat analysis. We are willing to work together. And it's irresponsible because it's going to hurt the world economy and it's not in the benefit of both continents. So most important is that we de-escalate.
So de-escalate. The president's getting ready to go to Davos, Mark. Yeah. He's going to see these foreign leaders. I mean, you obviously heard what the vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee said. He comes from a point of view. There has been a defense of Greenland or going after Greenland, not militarily, but making a deal to get Greenland for a long time.
Since Harry Truman in 1946. He actually offered them Barrow, Alaska in place of it, and they turned it down, and in 1967, biggest oil strike in world history. So they made a mistake then, they're making a mistake now. Look, Donald Trump, the idea that he's doing this because of the Nobel Prize, as Senator Warner suggested, is absurd. I wrote my first column agreeing with Trump on Greenland in 2019. He was talking about this in his first term. And, you know, when you go back and you look at like the NATO alliance, you know, everyone said he was blowing up the Atlantic Alliance in his first term when he said they have to spend 2% of their GDP or he won't defend them under Article 5. And it turned out that they came around and did what he wanted them to do. What's going to the way out of this is very simple. You go in, you negotiate with the Danes on a new military treaty that allows us to do anything we want militarily, build any bases we have, put the Golden Dome in. You get a minerals deal similar to the one we have with Ukraine, where we share the profits with the people of Greenland, and you have an agreement that there'll be no Chinese, no Russian presence, and then you let them have sovereignty, put their flag up, and they can pay for the health care, the universal health care, and the free college for the 57,000 people in Greenland, and problem solved.
Britt, we talk about it all the time. We talk about what is said, what is tweeted, versus what is happening. You know, the iceberg above the water as far as the attention, and the iceberg below the water as far as what the ultimate goal and what's going to happen. Could that be what's happening here?
I would think so, Brad. And remember this, if you're trying to understand Donald Trump, you can look at what he does most of the time as a never-ending quest for leverage in dealing with other people, other politicians, and other nations. And I think, as Mark suggests, that's what's going on here. I don't think he's going to militarily attack Greenland. I think he'd love to buy it if the Danes would sell it to him. But I think the kind of agreement that Mark has just outlined is probably very much in prospect. At least the president would settle for that. What I do think is this, that his efforts on Greenland have baffled a lot of people. It's not popular in this country. If he gets a good deal and we get the use of Greenland for our military purposes, that may all work out for him. But at the moment, he's underwater on Greenland. Yeah,
and explaining that to the American people is another part of it, Howie.
Brett, nobody wants this. Not the people in Denmark, not the people in Greenland, and nearly 9 in 10 in a Quinnipiac poll saying they don't want a military option. That includes 68% of Republicans. Now, I think the president's feeling emboldened after the capture of Maduro in Venezuela. There's already a U.S. military base there in Greenland. There could be more. But I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that this could blow up the Atlantic Alliance.
Yeah. Yeah, Missy, last word quickly.
I have to say, as somebody who used to work for Senator Mark Warner, I think he did a really great job representing the Democratic interests there with Greenland. Keep on it with Greenland. We love a welfare state.
Okay. There you go. Well, we'll see. We're going to follow all sides, and obviously we have world leaders talking about it all the time. Panel, thanks.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.